Welcome. In this lecture, we'll be taking the concepts introduced in Chapter 9, particularly about introductions and conclusions, and taking them a little further. Let's start with introductions. Your book lists 2 reasons for an introduction, but I would add a few more. The idea of a hook is one good way of thinking about an intro, but that doesn't mean necessarily that every intro has to be gimmicky. Sometimes you'll use that funny or shocking or clever opening line, but sometimes you're going to want your introduction to be more professional or formal sounding. In that case, don't think about hooking the reader quite so much as about raising the topic of conversation, getting the reader thinking. Also, you want to give your reader a reason to care, so you make it relevant to the reader's life. Suppose, let's say that you're writing a persuasive essay about immigration, but only some of your readers are immigrants. So why should the non-immigrants care about the issue? That's what the introduction is for. If you can show how it affects their lives, or let's say how it's an issue of justice that all people ought to be invested in, or how it's going to affect their work prospects, or perhaps help them sympathize with an individual who's involved in the issue. Now you've given them a reason to care. Now, not every essay necessarily deals with controversy or controversial issues. For the ones that do, though, it can be helpful to include some explanation of, say, some people believe X about this subject, some people believe Y about this subject, some think Z about this subject, so that you can give your reader more background on the topic. So outline the controversy for the reader. That can be a good option for the introduction. See if your reader needs to know anything else in order to make sense of the rest of the essay. Then you could put that background information into the intro. But if there is a lot of background information, then move it to the second paragraph. If there's just a little that the reader could help, you could put in the intro to help the reader, that's fine. If you have to really go back and go over the whole history of the situation, then it's best to move it later in the essay. And then, of course, introducing the main point, the thesis. Your book talks about that, and that is the most important thing for the introduction to do. All of these others are helpful. Maybe pick 1 or 2 of them. They're optional, but every single introduction should include the thesis. Especially in academic writing, the professor is always looking for the thesis in that first paragraph. Although, if you have a really long paper, 10 plus pages, the introduction might encompass 2 or 3 paragraphs. But regardless, somewhere in the intro, however long it is, the thesis must be found. Now, sometimes in popular writing or, say, creative writing, writers will build up to their thesis and sort of spring it like a surprise at the end of the essay. But that's pretty risky in academic papers. So I think unless you have a really good reason, always put your thesis in your introductory paragraph. So your textbook provides 5 different possible ways to begin your essay to write your introduction, but I'm going to give you even a few more than that. Your book suggests opening with a quote, which is a great idea, but you need to make sure that the quote is something fresh. If it's tired, worn out, if you've seen it about 20 times on Facebook, then find a different quote. Find something new, something the reader won't have heard before. Something like, "Be the change you wish to see in the world" is an admirable sentiment, but it's just too cliche to use as an essay opener. It can also be helpful, like in this example, to provide some context for the quote. Not just who said it, but why who they are, why they matter, when they said it, maybe, or what have you. You could also open with a question, as your book suggests, or even a series of questions, as this introduction to this article does. I do recommend, however, that you always answer any question that you ask. Don't just leave it hanging. This author does that really well here with their final sentence. The answer to all these questions is, of course, no. Even if you think the reader will always, easily know the answer to the question, say it anyway, because you don't want to take the risk that your reader might answer the question in a different way than you want them to. Here's one that your book doesn't mention, but it can be really effective, beginning with something shocking. I really like this quote because though the first statement is very shocking, the realization that one is dying comes slowly, the language is not. Notice there's no exclamation points here. There's no capitalized words. The author's still using a formal tone, even though they're discussing something terrible. This is another one of the differences between popular writing and academic writing. When academic writing deals with extreme topics like death, violence, and so on, it remains calm and formal in tone. Academic writing can certainly express strong opinion, but it should never come across as hysterical or enraged. Here's an example of an opener that outlines the controversy and gives a little bit of background. Now, this is just the beginning of the paragraph, so the author tells us there's been an increasing wave of controversy, a substantial number of American Indians feel this way, and so on. The paragraph will probably go on to give the author's own opinion and perhaps what some other sides of the controversy think. They might go on to say others have responded by saying such and such, and then perhaps follow with the author's own argument. One benefit of opening with a statement of the obvious about your topic is that it gives every reader an entry point. Every single person can understand and agree with that first sentence, that divorce is now a part of everyday American life. So you've given your reader sort of like a stepping stone to begin the journey with you. Notice in the second sentence of this intro how the author's created a nice parallel structure as she lists the places where divorce is found. Our laws and institutions, our manners and mores, our movies and television shows, and so on. It has a really nice rhythm. It's pleasant to read. The intro is a good place to do little kind of fancy stylistic sentences like this. Once you get into the body of the essay, this kind of thing can be sort of distracting, but it does fit well into the introduction and conclusion. So you have a lot of options when it comes to writing your introductions and all your essays in this class and other classes. I recommend trying out different ones. Don't get stuck in a rut. Experiment. Find out which method fits best with each topic that you write about. However, though you have a lot of options, there are a few things to avoid. The biggest cliche of student essay introductions is the dictionary definition. Webster-Merriam Dictionary defines love as blah, blah, blah. We've all done it. But it has come to be associated with high school writing, perhaps just lazy writing. Every now and then an author comes along who can make it fresh and unique, but usually it's just a fallback when you can't think of any other way to begin. So I would recommend avoiding that one for a while. At this level in your college career, I would say avoid any kind of meta discourse, talking about what you're going to talk about, saying, here's what I will argue in this essay, and so on. When you're writing a 2 or 3 or 5 page essay, that's really not necessary. When you someday begin writing 10, 20, 30 page research papers, then you might find it useful to start doing this in order to help your reader navigate more complex arguments. But for now, I would say avoid it. Obviously, apologizing, it just undermines your credibility with the reader. Write with confidence and honesty, just like you would with public speaking. Even that kind of self-deprecating tone like, well, I may not be the brightest person, but even I know, all that, it doesn't really come across very well in writing, so it's best to just go ahead and avoid it. And finally, although a general statement about your topic can be useful, like we saw a little bit ago, these examples here are sort of clunkers, those really general statements. Since the beginning of time, human beings have always done such and such. I've just seen those in way too many essays. They're pretty worn out, cliche. So go ahead and avoid getting too broad. Start with your main idea, the main topic of the essay if you're going to start with a general or broad statement. Don't go all the way back to the beginning of time. All right, this video will continue in part 2, so I will see you there.